cleaning, and an SS woman came to the door and asked, "Who is making all that noise?" And I spoke a little German, because I learned at home. I took German hours when I was 3-4 years old. So I said, I'm crying. I don't want to die. I know where you go from here." He said, "You're going to your mother. Why do you cry?" I said, "You see, outside the flames, that's where my mother went. And that's why I'm crying. I don't want to go there. My poor mother went there, had no choice. But I'm young and I want to live and I want to work. I can show you I can do good work. And I don't want to die, and that's why I'm crying." I was 13 years old that time.
The Allies really had bombed the railways to Auschwitz. Thousands and thousands of Jews would have been saved.
One of the more disturbing and unanswered questions of World War II is why the death camp known as Auschwitz-Birkenau, or simply Birkenau, was not bombed in 1944 when it could have been.
We couldn't understand how people, the Germans, and all their friends, the collaborators, could kill people and nobody is helping us.
At the height of the war, the Nazis, using the worst killing machine in history, were gassing and cremating over 10,000 people a day. By 1944, it is estimated that close to 1 million people had been murdered in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Considering the vast bombing campaign in Europe, could Allied forces have directed any of their air power to the destruction of the crematoria at Birkenau, or to the rail lines leading to the camp? More important, should they have? What prevented the Allies, and especially the Americans, from responding to this evil? Was it a lack of understanding, military resources, indifference, or willful evasion? Would such a military diversion have affected the war effort in any appreciable way? To answer these questions, we must begin by examining what the Allies knew about the ongoing genocide and when they learned of the existence of gas chambers and crematoria at Birkenau death camp.
The Allies at the very top knew. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. And all of those people who have been pretending that Roosevelt or Churchill were up in some eyrie where they looked down upon the grand picture of the war and didn't know about this are simply lying.
By November 24th, 1942, the State Department had received adequate information that there was no question that this was occurring.
Rabbi Wise and several other Jewish leaders with some difficulty got an appointment with President Roosevelt on December 8th, 1942.
They brought with them a 20-page report putting together the various informations they had received on the mass murder, and it was called Blueprint for Extermination. They handed this to Roosevelt and he said, "I don't need to read your reports. I know what's in them, and it's worse even than what's in your report."
The 20-page report handed to President Roosevelt, entitled Blueprint for Extermination, revealed the existence of the death camp near the Polish town of Oswiecim, better known by its German name, Auschwitz.
Now that's very significant because it means there's no question that President Roosevelt knew from December 8th, 42 onward that the Holocaust was happening.
Centers have been established in various parts of Eastern Europe for the scientific and cold-blooded mass murder of Jews. The slaughter of trainloads of Jewish adults and children in great crematoria at Oswiecim, near Krakow, is confirmed by eyewitnesses in reports which recently reached Jerusalem. This information was buried on page 10 in the New York Times 2 weeks earlier, on November 25th, 1942.
Jewish officials in Europe compiled information about Auschwitz-Birkenau. The Polish underground got a wealth of information about operations at Auschwitz.
From eyewitnesses ad ultra, the British code-breaking operation, the Allies actually had information on some of the crematoria before they were even completed.
During 1942, the British intercepted decodes. The coding was done by the sophisticated German Enigma machine, which the SS and the concentration camp hierarchy used. I have seen some decodes indicating the construction of a huge crematorium at Birkenau, so there was some information available from decodes directly. The killings at Auschwitz and Birkenau were not a secret to the West.
On August 27, 1943, reacting to new reports of transports of Jews being killed in gas cells at Auschwitz, the chairman of the British Joint Intelligence Committee, William Cavendish Bentinck, wrote, "The Poles, and to a far greater extent the Jews, tend to exaggerate German atrocities in order to stoke us up." Incredibly, Cavendish Bentinck's dismissal of the facts came 8 months after the Allied declaration of December 17, 1942, condemning the German government's intention to exterminate the Jewish people in Europe, and denouncing in the strongest possible terms the bestial policy of cold-blooded extermination.
The Allied statement of December 17, 1942, in which the British and American governments and other Allied governments for the first time recognized formally a Nazi policy of extermination of the Jewish people.
First, clear-cut recognition and public expression by the Allied powers that the Jews were being mass murdered.
In early 1944, a number of circumstances combined to make bombing the Birkenau death camp and the railways leading to it from Hungary critically important and militarily feasible. By May 1944, American and British air forces, which had been operating from southern Italy since December 1943, reached full strength and started pounding Axis industrial complexes in Central and East Central Europe. For the first time, Allied bombers could strike Auschwitz, located in the southwestern corner of Poland. The rail lines to Auschwitz from Hungary were also within range. On March 19, 1944, Admiral Nicholas Horthy, the regent of Hungary, under pressure from Hitler, installed a fascist government. The new political situation meant that 800,000 Hungarian Jews were now in mortal danger, although they did not yet know it.
We didn't know we were going to Auschwitz. They lied to us. The lie was that we were going to be resettled to work camps.
When we came to Auschwitz, this was the end of anything that we knew. We were shocked with what we saw.
We got off the train. I asked a German SS man, I asked, what's burning up here? What's this flame? I asked. I was 13 years old. And he said, this is an Eisenfabrik, an iron factory.
Later on I found out it was the crematorium. They were burning people day and night. Oh, yeah.
My oldest sister wouldn't let my mother's arm go. And she said, this is my mother, my mutter, and she wouldn't let her go. And they were hitting her. Let her go. You go with the young ones, and she goes with the older ones. And I remember when they were hitting her, my mother went. That's how I remember my mother last time. That was it. And then they took them and they gassed them.
My relatives were burned. All my grandmother, my uncles, my cousins, my entire family went up in smoke.
All our people, every woman in this camp, wherever I was waiting for the Allies to bomb, even if we would die.
The Polish underground managed to get a number of people close to the camps at Auschwitz and Birkenau, and some of those agents and informants came out with very detailed accounts of how many people, how many prisoners had been brought into the camps, what methods of killing and torture were being used in the camps.
On March 21st, 1944, 2 days after the fascists took power in Hungary, the Washington Post published a report from the Polish government in exile in London stating, Poles report Nazis slayed 10,000 daily. The report confirmed that more than 500,000 persons, mostly Jews, had been put to death at a concentration camp at Auschwitz, southwest of Krakow. The report also stated that 3 crematoria had been erected inside the camp to dispose of 10,000 bodies a day. There were 2 errors in the report. There was a 4th crematorium, and by March 1944, it is estimated that close to 1 million Jews had already been killed at Birkenau. On March 24th, 1944, 5 days after the Nazis installed a puppet government in Hungary, President Roosevelt spoke in a press conference. What he said was reported on the front page of the New York Times. In one of the blackest crimes of all history, the wholesale, systematic murder of the Jews of Europe goes on unabated every hour. He acknowledged that the Jews in Hungary are now threatened with annihilation. All who knowingly take part in the deportation of Jews to their death in Poland are equally guilty with the executioner. This was 2 months before they were deported to the death camp. In the 7 weeks between May 15th and July 7th, 1944, 440,000 of these Hungarian Jews were killed in Birkenau. The issue of bombing Auschwitz did surface in 1944. Requests for military intervention were made by Jewish groups and the Czech government in exile in London, but their call went unheeded. What could have been the Allied justification at that time for not taking any action?
The response to the request to bomb Auschwitz and all, it comes back from the Americans is that we're trying to end the war as soon as possible. By ending the war as soon as possible, we end it for everyone sooner, and we save everyone's lives.
Roosevelt's consistent answer to the Jewish leaders was, the way to save the Jews is to win this war as quickly as possible. And anything that stood in the way of winning this war, including any effort to try to stop the Holocaust, would be counterproductive.
In response to requests for military intervention in June 1944, the Operations Division of the United States War Department, OPD, ruled against the proposed bombing, stating that the suggestion was impracticable because it could be executed only by diversion of considerable air support, essential to the success of our forces now engaged in decisive operations. This language was adapted by United States Assistant Secretary of War John J. McCloy in his July 4th, 1944 response to a request for military action. On August 14th, in response to yet another bombing request, McCloy again restated OPD's rejection. He added that after a study it became apparent that not only was such an operation a diversion from decisive operations elsewhere, but that it was of such doubtful efficacy that it did not warrant the use of our resources.
There was no such study. The study's been hunted for. There is no such study in the file.
Assistant Secretary of State McCloy said, no, we're not going to get into this. There was no detailed investigation of the logistical feasibility of such a raid.
To date, no historian has uncovered any such study.
McCloy seemed to cut things off. There was nobody above McCloy who restarted them.
The most logical place to have conducted such a probe into how Birkenau could have been bombed would have been in the Mediterranean theater of operations, the closest Allied air bases. This was never done. General Ira Aker, the theater commander of Allied air forces in the Mediterranean, was not consulted on the issue. In a letter dated April 11, 1977, General Aker wrote,
I do not recall that General Spaatz inquired of me as Mediterranean Allied Air Forces commander regarding the feasibility of bombing the Auschwitz camp. I was not aware at that time of any mass killings at the Auschwitz camp. To the best of my memory, no one ever suggested that the 15th Air Force or any other unit under my command engage in bombing any of these camps.
if a study had been conducted, it would have revealed that Allied intelligence personnel at the operational level in Italy knew of the location of what they believed to be a large slave labor camp. They were unaware it was a death camp. Information at the top had not filtered down. This target chart, given to air crews for the August 20th and September 13th Allied raids on the IG Farben oil plant, shows both Birkenau and the oil plant 5 miles away. In fact, air crews on missions to bomb the oil plant were briefed to avoid hitting the camp area.
On our mission briefing, when we bombed the area near at Auschwitz, we were specifically warned to avoid the slave labor camp. We wanted to avoid hitting the camp because had we hit it, we would kill what we thought would be many innocent people.
John McCloy, U.S. Assistant Secretary of War, in his August 14th letter, also erroneously states that Allied bombers were involved in decisive operations elsewhere. As part of the American and British plan to destroy German oil plants, the area around Auschwitz was literally a hotbed of Allied bombing at the time of McCloy's letter. Nearby oil plants at Zerbinia, Czechowitz, Lechhammer, Odertal, Bohumen, Drohobitz, and Moravska Ostrava were all hit in August. The IG Farben oil plant at Auschwitz was hit on August 20th, just 1 week after McCloy wrote about decisive operations elsewhere.
126 American heavy bombers struck Auschwitz, while elsewhere, how far away? Elsewhere, 5 miles to those gas chambers. And that's not the only instance of, well, the plain words lying, we'll say disingenuousness involved in the overall picture.
In Great Britain, Winston Churchill, at the request of Jewish agency officials Chaim Weizmann and Moshe Chertok, had earlier approved a bombing mission against Birkenau. In a memo to Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden, dated July 7, 1944, Churchill wrote, "Get anything out of the Air Force you can and invoke me if necessary." The implementation of the mission fell to Norman H. Bottomley, the British Deputy Chief of the Air Staff. Unlike McCloy and the U.S. War Department, the necessity of conducting a comprehensive target study was acknowledged by Bottomley in a memo dated August 2, 1944. Bottomley wrote, "I have discussed this subject with General Spaatz, who is most sympathetic. Before we can consider any action, however, it is necessary to know more about the precise location, extent, and nature of the camps and installations at Birkenau. It is particularly necessary to have some photographic cover." The response came the next day from William Cavendish Bentinck, the same intelligence official who in August 1943 wrote that reports of German atrocities had been exaggerated. He wrote that unless the air staff can be given an exact pinpoint of this camp, the airmen will experience difficulty in finding it. What he said was simply not true.
From our altitude of 25 to 30,000 feet, if we were asked to locate a large installation, it wouldn't be difficult to do. And even if we weren't sure of it, we would take pictures. We had enough film to take pictures and targets of opportunity.
The idea that the air crews were not accustomed to looking for unique signatures on the ground, that's preposterous.
If we had, for example, been told that it was in this area, we would have photographed the area.
The reconnaissance planes would take photographs in sequence in a run, and it would go back and forth several times, so you covered, with the 6-inch focal length, 72 square miles in each print, you covered a lot of ground.
I would have said that an exact pinpoint was not necessary. It would have been enough to say that this death camp is on the edge of whatever town it was.
These things certainly would be easily spotted from the air and photographed.
I think it would have been a routine photographic sortie.
In fact, the British Foreign Office, where Cavendish Bentinck was a senior official, had already received the full report of two Auschwitz escapees, Rudolf Werber and Alfred Wetzler. The Werber-Wetzler report, which had been widely publicized in England and Switzerland, detailed the deportations to the camp, the killing process at Birkenau, and its exact location, precisely 3 kilometers from the town of Auschwitz. Yet this senior intelligence official claimed total ignorance of the death camp at Birkenau. Eventually, Churchill's approval to bomb Birkenau was abandoned. Again, for reasons that remain unclear, Foreign Office officials simply refused to give the British Air Ministry the target information it requested. There is no indication that Churchill ever followed up on his initial approval to bomb Birkenau. The Auschwitz area was certainly within range of Allied photo reconnaissance aircraft. As early as October 1942 and again in August 1943, British planes obtained photographs of the oil refinery at Blechhammer, just 47 miles from Auschwitz. In early 1944, the industrial plants at Auschwitz came under Allied scrutiny after a debriefing with a Belgian prisoner who had escaped from the Farben oil plant the previous May. To confirm the escapees' detailed report of synthetic oil and rubber plants, the first Allied photo reconnaissance mission to Auschwitz was flown on February 26, 1944, but the pictures were unusable due to cloud cover.
We were briefed to photograph the Auschwitz area on the 26th of February 1944. My navigator, Alistair Roger, and I did actually photograph it.
On April 4th, the oil plant was re-photographed, the photos revealing more information than was ever intended. The photos revealed for the first time Auschwitz I, the main camp. On the other side of the marshalling yard, the SS quarters are visible, as is the first row of barracks on the eastern edge of Birkenau. Beginning in early 1944, the Auschwitz area came under constant aerial surveillance, not because of the death camp, but because of the necessity of bombing the oil plant, which was part of the German oil industry. The South African photo reconnaissance pilot Charles Barry, who flew the April 4th mission, wrote that he and his 2 tour navigators became so used to the area that we could find our way around it without a map. Of the 3 major camps that made up Auschwitz, Auschwitz I, the main camp, Auschwitz II, Birkenau, and Auschwitz III, Buna. Birkenau was by far the largest. The 4 crematoria were situated along Birkenau's western periphery, a clear and accessible target. On May 31st, the entire camp at Birkenau was photographed. Further photo reconnaissance missions were flown on June 26th, July 8th, August 9th, and August 12th. On August 20th, the Farben oil plant was bombed.
In those days, you did have the information, and it could have been done.
It was all there.
This means that by August 3rd, the date of Cavendish Bentinck's memo expressing skepticism in locating Birkenau, detailed photos of Birkenau were available in Allied film libraries. However, nobody looked. And if they did, they looked away. Having possession of such photos was a preliminary step. The more critical question was, would it have been possible to locate Birkenau and to pinpoint the exact location of the 4 crematoria within the camp?
The Auschwitz-Birkenau area was an enormous place, and it wasn't small, and that could have been easily spotted from the air.
Any trained interpreter who is told what to look for or told about the existence of such a camp would find immediately. It wouldn't take him 15 seconds.
You use a stereoscope, you use 2 prints, there was overlap. You'd take the two prints and put them down, and then you'd look through this stereoscope. It would fuse the images, and you would see it in 3D. So if you were looking for smokestacks, those snap out real easily while you're doing the search area.
You'd certainly be able to pick out those buildings that had chimneys, primarily by the shadows that they would throw. I have no doubt that given the quality of the photographs that we had in the cameras, given the expertise of the pilots who flew these missions, and the expertise of the interpreters, I believe we could have picked out the camp, and we could have picked out the essential elements of the camp, including the crematorium. It's large, it's clear, and it's obvious.
By August 3rd, there was enough intelligence about Birkenau, as well as high-quality aerial photographs, to have precisely located the camp and the 4 crematoria.
The feeling was, well, you had a bunch of inexperienced photo interpreters and all that. That's a lot of poppycock. By the time, in 1944, we were far advanced in terms of our abilities to look at photographs and to extract information.
Judging from the ingenuity that the staff planners had in the Air Forces, the British, the Americans, the French, I believe that given the task, they would have found a way to do it.
All they had to do was to say, hey, look, we've got some information that something bad is going on in this area, that people are being killed, and would you look and see if you could find it? And even with my primitive knowledge at that time, I would have found it.
There was enough information available by the end of 1942 and certainly during 1943 that the Allied governments could have begun to plan for doing something to stop the killing.
The tragedy is that there was enough information to provide a target study months prior to the start of the Hungarian deportations in May 1944. Another question that has troubled Holocaust survivors and scholars alike is, why weren't the rail lines and bridges to the death camp at Birkenau bombed?
This is how they packed us in to the trains. It was crowded. People didn't have any place to even breathe. And of course we traveled, I don't know how many hours, but I know it was a long trip. And no water, and it was hot. They should have prevented all these trains from going back and forth and taking all these people, and how so many people died